You speak Mandarin. Ethan Sterling's sharp gaze locked onto the waitress. Olivia flinched, caught off guard after ending the urgent, hushed phone call. Not just hello and goodbye. The billionaire continued, his voice, low, intense, cutting through the restaurant's quiet luxury. That was fluent. Technical. Olivia's heart pounded against her ribs. He wasn't supposed to notice. He wasn't supposed to understand. What secret had she just accidentally revealed? In that single moment, under that piercing stare, Olivia Sterling knew her carefully managed precarious life was about to change forever. The low hum of discreet conversation and the almost silent chime of silverware against porcelain were the familiar soundtrack to Olivia Sterling's evenings. At Elysian Table, Manhattan's glittering new temple to fine dining, she moved with the practiced invisibility of a phantom, her simple black uniform designed to fade into the opulent background. She refilled water glasses, sculpted like melting ice, replaced linen napkins heavy as velvet, her existence acknowledged only by a fleeting glance or an imperious wave. $2,000 bottle of Chateau Petrus. For table 7, she murmured to the sommelier, suppressing a sigh. And Mr. Davenport sends his compliments, but wonders if the chef could possibly make the foie gras less foie gras-y. The sommelier rolled his eyes dramatically. Let me guess. He wants it vegan. Olivia managed a tired smile. Something like that. Days that started at dawn, tending to her ailing mother Eleanor, before the grueling evening shift left little energy for witty banter, or for contemplating the absurdity that some people worried about the ethics of duck liver, while she worried about affording the experimental medication keeping her mother's fragile heart beating. Her phone vibrated silently in her apron pocket. The hospital. Again. Her own heart clenched. She'd have to check it soon. Just then, a subtle shift rippled through the dining room. Conversations paused mid-sentence. The manager straightened his already immaculate tie, his posture radiating a sudden, almost painful deference. Mr. Sterling, table 1. Immediately the manager hissed under his breath to the nearest staff, his eyes wide. Olivia froze for a half-second. Ethan Sterling, CEO of the monolithic Sterling Industries, a name synonymous with global finance, cutting-edge tech, and a level of wealth that felt like a different dimension. And by a twist of cosmic irony, the same surname she carried, a coincidence she constantly had to dismiss. Sterling is common enough, she reminded herself, like Smith or Jones or Billionaire. She watched as the maître d' escorted him to the best table, a throne overlooking the twinkling expanse of Central Park. Even without the name recognition, Ethan Sterling commanded attention. Tall, with sharp, intelligent features that seemed carved from granite, softened only slightly by eyes the color of a stormy sea. He moved with the quiet, unshakable confidence of a man who had never known the gnawing anxiety of a looming rent payment or a declined credit card. Clinging to his arm was a woman draped in diamonds that glittered aggressively under the chandeliers, Isabel Moreau, heiress to the Moreau fortune, and as the gossip columns breathlessly reported, Ethan Sterling's fiancée. Following them was a man with a perpetually severe expression, clutching a slim leather briefcase, like a shield. Arthur Keller, Sterling Industries' indispensable right-hand man, the eminence Grise, who had served Ethan's father before him. Unfortunately, Olivia's section included table 1. Experience had taught her that powerful men, dining with beautiful women, were often preoccupied, their tips reflecting their perceived importance rather than her service. Taking a deep breath, she approached. "Good evening," she said, offering menus that felt heavier than usual. "Welcome to Elysian Table. May I get you something to drink this evening?" Ethan Sterling barely glanced up, his attention momentarily captured by Isabel Moreau, adjusting a stray strand of perfectly highlighted hair. The 98 Cheval Blanc he stated, not looking at the wine list. Arthur Keller nodded curtly beside him. An excellent vintage, Mr. Sterling. Isabel's gaze flickered over Olivia, a practiced dismissal that took less than a second. And sparkling water. Still. Room temperature. Olivia nodded, retreating with the familiar faint sting of being utterly unseen. She could feel her phone vibrate again in her pocket. A low, persistent buzz. Urgent. By the time she returned with the obscenely expensive wine and the specific water, the conversation at table 1 had turned serious, conducted in low, clipped tones. Negotiations stalled. Thornton Global is playing hardball, Arthur Keller was saying. Ethan raised a hand, silencing him, as Olivia expertly poured the deep red wine without spilling a drop. She placed Isabel's water down, just so. Her phone vibrated again, 3 short, sharp pulses this time. The emergency code she'd arranged with the hospital for Eleanor. Panic flared, cold and sharp. "Excuse me," Olivia said, her voice steadier than she felt, already turning towards the service corridor. "I need to step away for a moment. My colleague will take your order." "Wait," Ethan Sterling's voice cut through the air, low but carrying an undeniable weight of command. "It wasn't a request. We haven't ordered." Olivia paused, her hand instinctively reaching for her phone. "I apologize, sir," she said, meeting his intense, stormy gaze briefly. "It's a family emergency." Before he could object further, she slipped through the swinging door into the relative quiet of the corridor, the frantic rhythm of the kitchen, a dull roar behind her. She answered on the 3rd ring. "Olivia, Dr. Alistair Finch here." The doctor's voice was smooth, professional, but held an undercurrent she'd come to dread. "There's been a slight complication with your mother's response to the current medication protocol." Olivia leaned against the cool metal wall, closing her eyes. "Complication? Is she—" "She's stable," Dr. Finch interrupted reassuringly, a little too quickly. "But the telemetry shows arrhythmias we need to manage more aggressively. There's a new enzyme inhibitor therapy, showing remarkable promise in similar cases. Very cutting edge." Olivia knew what was coming. "And the cost, Dr. Finch. It is significantly more involved naturally," he said, the smooth voice, now laced with something that sounded suspiciously like leverage. "Approval pathways are complex." But he added, pausing meaningfully, "Sometimes demonstrating a certain cooperative spirit can help expedite matters with the review board. Friends in the right places, you understand." Cooperative spirit? Friends. Code for the favors Dr. Finch occasionally requested. Discreet inquiries about wealthy patients, information easily gleaned during her shifts. Bile rose in her throat. Just do what's best for her doctor. "Please." "Of course, Olivia. We always do," he replied, the unspoken expectation hanging heavy in the air before he disconnected. She took a ragged breath. She'd have to find the money. Somehow. Maybe sell. What did she even own? Returning to the dining room felt like walking onto a stage under a harsh spotlight. To her surprise, the Sterling party hadn't ordered yet. Ethan was looking directly at her, his expression unreadable, a slight frown creasing his brow. Arthur Keller watched her with an unnerving stillness. Isabel looked bored. My sincere apologies for the delay. Olivia began, forcing professionalism back into her voice. Ethan cut her off, not unkindly, but firmly. "Is everything all right?" "Yes, sir." "Thank you." A resolved matter. She pulled out her notepad, ready to take their order, needing the familiar routine. "May I take your order now?" As she meticulously noted down Isabel's 6 modifications to the lobster salad and Arthur Keller's lengthy list of dietary restrictions, her phone buzzed again. Not the hospital this time. A Beijing number. Her language exchange partner probably wondering why she'd missed their session. She declined the call. It immediately rang back. With an apologetic glance at the table, Ethan's gaze now sharp with curiosity, Isabel's tinged with annoyance, Olivia saw the same number. An urgent call from my study group, she murmured, turning slightly away, needing to shut it down quickly. Excuse me one moment. Before Ethan could respond, she answered in flawless, rapid-fire Mandarin. Wei xian zai bu fang bian. Hello. Now isn't convenient. The voice on the other end was frantic, launching into a rushed explanation about semiconductor patents and licensing deadlines. Olivia frowned, confused. Nida qualiba, you must have the wrong number, she replied firmly, still in Mandarin. Wabu kanyu renhe jishu tan pan. I'm not involved in any technology negotiations. The caller persisted, mentioning specific company names Olivia didn't recognize. Tengze, listen. Olivia said, her tone hardening, the professional Mandarin honed through years of study taking over. Wo bu zidao ni, yao zao she dan wo zishi, yige zai kan teng dagong, diswe sheng. Wo me yu kwangxian chai we ni shode naxi wenjian. I don't know who you're trying to reach, but I'm just a student working in a restaurant. I don't have access to the documents you're talking about. She ended the call abruptly, turning back to the table. Silence. All three were staring at her. Isabel looked bewildered. Arthur Keller's eyes had narrowed into calculating slits. And Ethan Sterling? He was looking at her as if seeing her for the very first time. The cool mask was gone, replaced by undisguised intense scrutiny. My deepest apologies, Olivia said, switching seamlessly back to English, her cheeks warming slightly. Wrong number. From China. Now about those orders. Ethan didn't ask about the orders. His voice was quiet, measured. You speak Mandarin? It wasn't a question. Yes, she replied simply, feeling suddenly exposed. Not just conversational Mandarin, he continued, his gaze unwavering. That sounded like fluent business and technical Mandarin. Olivia shifted uncomfortably. Great, she thought wryly. Just what I needed. My hidden talent for obscure linguistic negotiation gets noticed by the one person in the room who might actually understand its significance. I was a linguistics major, she admitted reluctantly, before I had to leave university. Chinese dialects were my focus. Interesting, Ethan said, the word hanging in the air. He exchanged a swift, loaded glance with Arthur Keller. Very interesting indeed. He picked up his menu, his expression once again coolly composed, but the intensity in his eyes remained. We'll start with the beluga caviar. And Miss Sterling, he added, meeting her gaze directly. Perhaps you could join us for a moment after you place our order. We have a proposition for you. Olivia's heart hammered against her ribs. A proposition from Ethan Sterling. She glanced towards the service corridor, thinking of her mother, of Dr. Finch's veiled threats, of the impossible bills piling up. Whatever this was, it felt like stepping off a cliff. But maybe it was the only way to fly. Beside Ethan, Arthur Keller watched her, a faint, unreadable smile playing on his lips. The Sterling Industries Tower wasn't just a building. It was a vertical statement of power, piercing the Manhattan skyline like a shard of smoked glass, and ambition. Stepping into the lobby the next morning, Olivia felt less like she was starting a job, and more like she'd accidentally wandered onto the set of a futuristic movie about oligarchs. Marble floors gleamed with an intimidating polish abstract sculptures that probably cost more than her mother's lifetime medical bills, adorned silent alcoves, and people in impeccably tailored suits glided past with the quiet urgency of those who measured time in stock market fluctuations. Okay, Olivia, she told herself, clutching her worn satchel. Just try not to smudge anything. She was met not by Ethan Sterling, but by the man who had been his shadow the night before, Arthur Keller. In the harsh light of day, his severe features seemed even more pronounced, his thin lips pressed into a line that suggested smiling was a frivolous waste of facial muscles. "Ms. Sterling," he greeted, his voice smooth but cool. "Mr. Ethan Sterling asked me to facilitate your onboarding. Your linguistic skills are required for immediate integration into Project Nightingale." Project Nightingale. Olivia echoed, following him towards a restricted elevator bank. "Our internal designation for the Thornton Global Partnership negotiations," Keller clarified without elaborating. "Your workstation is prepared in the linguistics annex. You'll be briefed by our technical team for the next 72 hours. Intensive immersion is required." His tone implied failure was not an option listed in the company handbook. The linguistics annex turned out to be a small, windowless office filled with dense binders and glowing monitors displaying complex schematics and financial projections in both English and Mandarin. For the next few days, Olivia was submerged in the intricate world of semiconductor technology and international intellectual property law. It was challenging, exhausting, but also strangely exhilarating. The part of her brain that had thrilled to the complexities of syntax and the nuances of dialect came alive again. She absorbed the technical jargon quickly, her translations noted for their accuracy, and more importantly, their grasp of underlying context, something the previous purely academic translators had apparently struggled with. She overheard one technician mutter to another, "She actually understands what it means, doesn't just swap the words." It was a small victory, a confirmation that she was more than just a waitress who got lucky. Her focus was absolute, driven by the constant gnawing worry about Eleanor. Dr. Finch sent brief, professionally worded texts. Progress stable but monitoring costs increasing, followed by any insights, yet regarding potential overseas investment sensitivities at Sterling, asking for a colleague. The pressure was mounting a sickening counterpoint to the intellectual stimulation of the work. The fragile bubble of her concentration was abruptly shattered midweek by the arrival of Isabel Moreau. Ethan Sterling's fiancée swept into the common area outside Olivia's annex like a couture hurricane, all sharp angles, expensive perfume, and undisguised disdain. "You must be the interpreter," Isabel stated, her voice dripping honeyed condescension, as her eyes performed a swift, dismissive appraisal of Olivia's simple blouse and slacks. "Olivia, is it? How?" Quaint, Olivia thought, forcing a polite smile. "Lady, my student loan debt alone could probably buy that handbag you're using as an armrest." "Yes, Miss Moreau. Olivia Sterling. Can I help you with something?" Hardly, Isabel scoffed lightly, turning her attention to examining her perfect manicure. "I was just curious to see the prodigy Ethan plucked from—" Where was it? A diner? A restaurant, Olivia corrected, calmly refusing to be ruffled. "Ah, yes. Well, do try to keep up. Billions are at stake. We wouldn't want any linguistic faux pas." With another dismissive flick of her gaze, Isabel turned and glided away, leaving a wake of expensive perfume and unspoken insults. Olivia took a slow breath, reminding herself of Eleanor, of the $12,000 enzyme inhibitor therapy Dr. Finch kept mentioning. A welcome contrast arrived later that day in the form of Daniel Sterling, Ethan's younger brother. He appeared at her office door with a hesitant smile and eyes that held genuine curiosity rather than judgment. He lacked Ethan's intimidating aura, possessing a more approachable, almost academic air. "Hi, you must be Olivia Sterling," he said, offering a hand. "Daniel Sterling. No relation?" "Well, obviously, some relation to the company name." He chuckled awkwardly, "but you know what I mean. Heard my brother recruited a linguistic genius." Olivia shook his hand, relieved by his lack of pretense. "I think genius might be overselling it. Desperate waitress with a knack for Mandarin is probably more accurate." Daniel laughed. "Ethan doesn't impress easily. Welcome aboard." His eyes lingered for a moment. You know Sterling and accountant. It rang a bell when Arthur mentioned your name. I was looking through some very old company archives recently for a historical project. He trailed off, frowning slightly. There was this huge scandal way back before my time really involving an accountant. I think her name was Sterling, too. Caused a massive fallout, supposedly even impacted my grandfather Marcus's health. Olivia felt a chill despite the office's controlled temperature. An accountant named Sterling, involved in a scandal linked to Marcus Sterling's death. It couldn't be. Could it? Sterling is a common name, she said, trying to sound casual, but her mind was racing. True, Daniel conceded, seeming to dismiss the thought. Anyway, just wanted to say hi. Don't let Arthur Keller bury you under too many technical manuals. He can be thorough. He gave her another friendly smile and departed. Daniel's words, coupled with Dr. Finch's increasingly urgent texts demanding useful insights, solidified a risky idea in Olivia's mind. She needed to know more about that old scandal. If her mother had worked here, had been involved, she had to know the truth. Citing the need to understand historical precedents for technology transfer agreements with Asian companies, she requested access to the pre-digital physical archives located deep in the building's sub-basement. Permission was granted surprisingly easily. It seemed few people ever bothered with the dusty relics of the past. The archive room smelled of decaying paper and forgotten secrets. Rows upon rows of drab grey filing cabinets stretched into the dim light. Olivia's heart pounded as she navigated the aisles, searching for personnel records from the late 90s and early 2000s. Accounting Department, S. Sanderson, Schwartz, Simmons, Sterling. There it was, a thick folder labeled Sterling Eleanor. Her hands trembled as she pulled it out. Inside, clipped to yellowing forms, was a photograph of her mother, younger, smiling, full of a hope Olivia hadn't seen in years. Senior Financial Analyst, Sterling Industries, 1998-2004. Olivia sank onto a nearby stool, the air knocked out of her lungs. Her mother had worked here for 6 years and never said a word. She devoured the contents. Glowing performance reviews, promotions. Then abruptly the tone shifted. Memos citing irregularities, breaches of fiduciary duty. And then the newspaper clippings, Sterling Industries, rocked by embezzlement scandal accountant, accused of $37 million fraud. CEO Marcus Sterling suffers fatal heart attack amidst crisis. The official story painted Eleanor as a cunning thief who had betrayed the company and caused its patriarch's death before disappearing. It felt utterly wrong, a grotesque distortion of the meticulous, fiercely honest woman who had raised her. Where did the money go? Olivia thought frantically. We never saw a dime of it. Tucked inside the back of the personnel file, almost hidden, was a small, worn, leather-bound notebook. Olivia opened it carefully. It was Eleanor's, filled with her familiar, neat handwriting. But instead of daily reminders, it contained pages of calculations, highlighted discrepancies in ledger numbers, question marks next to large international transfers, and recurring notations about offshore accounts and names, including Arthur Keller's and someone named J. Vance. Her mother hadn't been a thief. She had been investigating. Suddenly a voice cut through the heavy silence. Finding anything interesting down here? Olivia jumped, spinning around, clutching the notebook. Daniel Sterling stood in the doorway, his friendly expression replaced with one of serious contemplation. Daniel, I was just looking for background information on old contracts, she stammered, trying guiltily to slide the notebook back into the folder. He stepped further into the room, his gaze fixed on the folder in her hands. In the personnel files for Eleanor Sterling, he knew. The accountant involved in my grandfather's scandal. Olivia froze, Court, I can explain, I think Daniel said quietly, stepping closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. You just did. He glanced around the dusty room. You know, for someone accused of stealing millions, your mother left a trail even a history major could follow. Almost. Too obvious. He looked at Olivia, a spark of understanding in his eyes. If you needed an ally to figure out what really happened back then, maybe you just found one. Though he added, glancing nervously towards the door, we should probably discuss this somewhere less archival. Getting caught down here would be awkward. He offered a small, wry smile. And my excuse about checking the vintage paperclip inventory probably wouldn't hold up. The sleek interior of the Sterling Industries private jet sliced through the stratosphere, a capsule of hushed luxury speeding towards Shanghai. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with unspoken tensions. Olivia Sterling, ostensibly the junior member of the delegation, was buried in technical documents. Her focus a shield against the swirling currents of corporate power plays around her. Across the aisle, Ethan Sterling wasn't looking at the sweeping views below. His attention was fixed on a tablet displaying complex financial summaries, his brow furrowed in concentration. Olivia had noticed this shift in him over the past week. A new, sharper scrutiny applied to reports Arthur Keller usually handled a quiet intensity that suggested internal gears were grinding. Arthur Keller himself moved through the cabin with his usual frictionless efficiency, managing communications, confirming schedules, the perfect image of unflappable corporate control. Isabel Moreau, meanwhile, occupied herself by alternately flipping through a fashion magazine and subtly repositioning her enormous diamond engagement ring so it caught the light, occasionally casting possessive glances towards Ethan. Arthur, Ethan said suddenly, his voice cutting through the low hum of the engines. He gestured towards his tablet. These legacy fund transfers from the Zurich branch in Q403, the documentation seems unusually opaque compared to current compliance standards. Arthur Keller paused beside Ethan's seat, his expression unchanging. Ah yes, the heritage accounts, he said smoothly. Established by your father Marcus. Different times, different protocols. Entirely secure, of course. I oversee them personally to ensure continuity with his original vision. He offered a thin smile. Best not to disturb arrangements that have served the family so well for so long. The implicit message was clear. Don't question your father's legacy. Don't question me. Ethan didn't reply, but the line of his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly as he turned back to the screen. Shanghai greeted them with a dazzling skyline and the humid embrace of the East China Sea. The preliminary meetings with Thornton Global's executive team were a whirlwind of presentations, strategic posturing, and intricate discussions conducted primarily through Olivia's flawless translations. She navigated the complex interplay of business formality and subtle cultural cues, earning nods of appreciation from the Thornton executives and watchful, unreadable glances from Arthur Keller. Ethan remained largely reserved, observing, processing his earlier probing manner, replaced by a calculating quietness. During a break between sessions, Isabel cornered Ethan near the panoramic windows overlooking the Bund. Darling, she began, her voice low and urgent, I received some confirming documents from Father's PI regarding that Sterling woman. She subtly angled her tablet towards him, displaying what looked like old bank transfer authorizations and redacted internal memos. It's quite damning. Clearly shows irregular payments from Eleanor Sterling's accounts just before she disappeared, tied directly to the funds Marcus was investigating. Ethan looked at the screen, his expression carefully neutral. Thank you for sharing this, Isabel. Due diligence is always appreciated. But Olivia, watching from a distance, noticed the almost imperceptible flicker in his eyes as he registered the dates and account numbers Perhaps they didn't quite align with the narrative Keller had always pushed, or maybe they matched something else he had recently uncovered. He didn't seem convinced. He seemed analytical. Just as Olivia was processing this exchange, her personal phone vibrated with a chilling finality. It was Dr. Alistair Finch. Olivia, his voice was urgent, stripped of its usual professional smoothness. "Your mother's taken a significant turn. Severe cardiac arrhythmia. We need to initiate the enzyme inhibitor therapy immediately if we want to stabilize her." "Do it," Olivia whispered, frantically stepping into a deserted corridor. "Whatever it takes. The authorization requires multiple specialist sign-offs, complex insurance pre-approvals." Finch hesitated, the calculated pause stretching agonizingly. Unless I have a compelling reason to designate it as an immediate critical override. Perhaps some preliminary data suggesting instability in Thornton Global's long-term R&D funding, something concrete I could relay through certain medical advisory channels. To expedite Eleanor's case. The blackmail was no longer veiled. It was explicit. Her mother's life in exchange for corporate espionage. Give me until tomorrow morning," she pleaded, her voice shaking. "You have until the end of business today, Shanghai time," Olivia Finch stated flatly. "The clock is ticking." He disconnected, leaving Olivia trembling, trapped. Her turmoil must have shown on her face when she returned to the delegation lounge, because Arthur Keller approached her, his expression one of feigned concern. "Miss Sterling, are you quite well?" "You appear distressed." Before she could formulate a non-committal reply, a Thornton Global executive approached them. "Mr. Keller, Miss Sterling," the executive said politely. "Mr. Thornton sends his apologies for not joining the main sessions today due to prior commitments. However, he specifically requests a brief private meeting with Ms. Sterling now to discuss certain nuances in the Mandarin contract language only a native-level linguist could clarify." Keller's eyes narrowed slightly, but protocol dictated acceptance. "Of course. Ms. Sterling will be happy to assist Mr. Thornton." He gave Olivia a look that was both a warning and an instruction. Olivia followed the executive through silent minimalist corridors to a serene private tea garden tucked away on an upper floor of the Thornton Tower. Water murmured over smooth stones. Ancient bamboo swayed gently. A figure sat alone in a simple pavilion, his back to her, gazing out at the sprawling city. "Mr. Thornton." Olivia called softly in Mandarin, years of training, keeping her voice steady despite the chaos within. "You wished to see me." The figure didn't turn immediately. When he spoke, it wasn't in Mandarin, and the deep, slightly accented voice from the video conferences was gone, replaced by something warmer, more resonant, and unnervingly familiar. "The first time I held you," he said quietly in perfect English, "you were 3 days old. Your mother was sleeping in the hospital bed, exhausted. I sat by the window just like this, watching the sunrise over New York, and I promised I would protect you both. Always." Olivia froze, the blood draining from her face. Her mind struggled to connect the words to the shadowy CEO known as Mr. Thornton. It couldn't be. He turned then slowly and removed the dark sunglasses he always wore in public. The face that regarded her was older now, etched with lines of time and worry she couldn't comprehend. But it was unmistakably, impossibly, the face from the faded photograph she carried in her wallet. The face of the father she thought had died 20 years ago. "Hello, Olivia," he said softly, her eyes filled with a profound, aching sadness. "My name is Julian Vance, and I believe you are my daughter." The world tilted. Olivia gripped the edge of the pavilion railing to stay upright. "No. My father, Yulan Fang. He died. Car accident. There was a staged accident. Yes, Julian Vance corrected gently, and a grieving widow, and a closed casket. But there was no body, Olivia. Because I had to disappear. Disappear? Say why? Leave us. The questions tumbled out, fueled by 2 decades of unspoken grief and confusion. He gestured to the stone bench beside him. When she remained standing rigid with shock, he sighed. To keep you and your mother alive. I was an independent investigator Olivia hired to look into financial irregularities at several multinational firms. I uncovered a massive money laundering operation run by Marcus Sterling and facilitated by Arthur Keller. When I prepared my report, they threatened me. They sent pictures of you playing in the park, of Eleanor sleeping. The message was clear silence or else. So you faked your death. The words were flat, accusatory. It was the only way I could think of to sever their connection to you, to make them believe the threat was gone. Julian's voice was heavy with regret. I fled to China, built a new identity, a legitimate business, Thornton Global, all while gathering evidence, waiting for a chance to expose them safely. Your mother, Eleanor, she started working at Sterling after I died. She was brilliant. She found the same irregularities I did from the inside. She tried to gather proof, but Keller, ever watchful after my investigation, realized what she was doing. He framed her Olivia. Masterfully. Ruined her reputation, forced her to flee, with you used her as the perfect scapegoat. Olivia's mind reeled trying to process the impossible. Her mother framed, her father alive. The CEO she was negotiating with was her father. Wonderful a tiny hysterical corner of her brain thought. My father isn't dead. He's just secretly running a multi-billion-dollar corporation to get revenge on the people who framed my mother. Just a regular Tuesday. Why now, she whispered, finally finding her voice. Why reveal yourself now? Because Keller is using this Thornton deal, my company, to reactivate Marcus's old laundering channels, Julian said, his expression hardening. And because you are here caught in the middle, I need your help, Olivia. I need access to specific server logs within Sterling Industries logs only someone with your current clearance might reach. Help me get the final proof. Help me clear your mother's name and bring Keller down. As if on cue, her phone vibrated. A text message. Dr. Finch. Time's up, Olivia. Decision needed now. Eleanor's vitals are dropping. She looked from the phone screen to the face of the father she never knew she had. One man offered justice for the past. The other held her mother's life in his hands in the present. Trapped. The revelation in the Shanghai tea garden left Olivia Sterling reeling, caught between the ghost of her father and the ticking clock of her mother's life. But the shock quickly morphed into a cold, hard resolve. There was a third way. Not choosing between her father's justice and her mother's safety, but fighting for both. It would require a dangerous gamble, a tightrope walk over a chasm of corporate power and long-buried secrets. It would require trusting the very people she'd been conditioned to suspect. Within minutes, encrypted messages pulsed across continents. Olivia, using layers of untraceable relays provided by Julian Vance, connected with Daniel Sterling back in New York. The message was concise. Father alive. Keller framed Eleanor. Keller using Thornton, deal for laundering. Mother critical. Finch blackmailing. Need help? Now. Daniel's response was almost instantaneous. Knew Keller was dirty. Ethan suspects too, digging into old accounts. What's the plan? A new fragile alliance was forged in the crucible of desperation. Julian Vance, from his hidden command center, brought resources, financial backing, logistical expertise, and crucially access to private security networks that bypassed official channels. Daniel became the boots on the ground in New York, coordinating investigating Keller's movements, trying to pinpoint where Eleanor was being held. Ethan, still in Shanghai, but now fully aware of the stakes, agreed to play his part, confronting Arthur Keller, directly creating the necessary diversion. Olivia's role was the most perilous, using the anticipated chaos to secure the final irrefutable evidence from Keller's own systems. So standard Tuesday plan then, Daniel quipped dryly over the encrypted line during their hasty planning session. Expose decades of corporate fraud rescue. Mom from what sounds like a medical black site, hopefully avoid an international incident, and try not to get ourselves arrested or disappeared. Got it. Simple. Despite the humor, his voice was tight with tension. Ethan's confrontation with Arthur Keller took place the following morning, just before a scheduled signing ceremony for the preliminary Thornton Global Agreement. He found Keller in his suite, calmly reviewing documents. Ethan began, keeping his voice level, deceptively calm. I've been reviewing Father's heritage accounts. The lack of transparency is problematic for the upcoming IPO audit, and these large recurring payments to untraceable Cayman entities around the time Eleanor Sterling left the company. They require explanation. Keller looked up, his eyes like chips of ice. Ethan, we've discussed this. Those were Marcus's private arrangements. Discretion was paramount to him. Loyalty to his legacy demands we respect that. Loyalty doesn't mean willful blindness, Ethan countered, taking a step closer, especially when those same untraceable channels seem reactivated in the structure of this Thornton deal, and when the principal of Thornton Global bears a rather striking resemblance to a certain financial investigator who allegedly died 20 years ago after looking into those very accounts. He let the implication hang in the air. Keller's composure didn't break, but a flicker of something cold and dangerous sparked in his eyes. You're overtired, Ethan, listening to conspiracy theories from compromised sources. He stood up, smoothing his jacket. Your father trusted me implicitly. You would do well to remember that. Questioning my management of his affairs is questioning him. The veiled threat was unmistakable. But Ethan didn't back down. The Dan Vat, the internal conflict, had finally resolved into cold certainty. My father also valued results, Arthur, and the results I'm seeing raise serious questions. Consider this matter under formal review. He turned and left the suite, leaving Keller standing amidst the luxurious trappings of his carefully constructed world, now acutely aware that the walls were closing in. Feeling the pressure, Keller made his move. He contacted Isabel Moreau. He knew her father, Richard Moreau, had been deeply involved in Marcus Sterling's original schemes. Keller needed Isabel's influence, perhaps her family's connections, to manage the fallout or create a diversion. He likely also revealed the depth of the threat posed by Julian Vance, and Olivia maybe even hinting at the need for a permanent solution regarding Eleanor. But Isabel, already unnerved by Ethan's growing distance and Keller's increasingly erratic behavior, had received a different call just moments earlier. Daniel Sterling, leveraging the little information he had about Moreau family vulnerabilities gleaned from old files, had offered her a stark choice sync with Keller and risk federal investigation into her family's historical dealings, or provide critical information on Eleanor's location and Keller's immediate plans in exchange for carefully negotiated leniency. Faced with the reality of Keller's ruthlessness and the potential ruin of her own family, Isabel made her decision. An anonymous encrypted message containing the address of a private upstate medical facility and details of a planned patient transfer scheduled for that evening landed in Daniel's inbox. Well, Daniel muttered, reading the message. Amazing what the prospect of losing billions can do for one's moral compass. Or perhaps just one's instinct for self-preservation. The rescue operation launched immediately. Julian Vance's security team, working with Daniel's directions, converged on the isolated facility. It was less a hospital, more a sterile holding pen. They moved fast, disabling security, neutralizing the minimal staff, who seemed more like guards than caregivers. They found Eleanor in a stark room, hooked up to monitors displaying alarming readings. Her body frail, her consciousness clouded by drugs, Doctor. Finch had clearly prescribed to keep her weak and confused. They got her out, bundling her into a waiting transport equipped with advanced medical support, but it was terrifyingly clear she was in critical condition, the result of deliberate medical neglect orchestrated by Finch under Keller's orders. Simultaneously, back in Shanghai, the emergency created by Ethan's confrontation and news of Eleanor's transfer leaked strategically. Daniel gave Olivia the window she needed. While Keller was frantically making calls trying to manage the escalating crisis and confirm Eleanor's status, Olivia used a sophisticated phishing sequence disguised as an urgent security alert, a technique she'd ironically learned about while studying linguistic deception, to gain momentary high-level access to Keller's encrypted personal server partition within the Sterling network. Her fingers flew across her keyboard, navigating firewalls, downloading file after file, offshore account details, correspondence with Finch, incriminating memos linking Keller directly to the ongoing money laundering through the Thornton deal, even contingency plans involving Isabel's father. It was the final nail in Keller's coffin, the irrefutable proof Julian Vance had sought for 20 years. Just as the download completed, an alert flashed: security breach detected. Executive server partition. Lockdown initiated. Olivia ejected the drive and slipped out of her annex office, melting back into the chaos, just as alarms began to sound softly through the executive floor. Keller knew. He must have seen the server alert, realized Eleanor was gone, understood the game was up. Reports flooded the secure channels Julian Vance was monitoring. Keller had bypassed company protocols, heading directly for a private airfield outside Shanghai. But Ethan, alerted by Olivia's confirmation of the data transfer and Daniel's report of Keller's panicked flight, was already moving. Using his authority as CEO, he grounded Keller's jet and met him on the tarmac. Keller emerged from his car, his mask of composure finally shattered, replaced by undisguised fury. "You ungrateful whelp," he spat at Ethan. "After everything I did for you for your father, you did it for yourself, Arthur." Ethan replied, his voice steady, cold. "It ends now." Keller lunged, perhaps hoping to overpower Ethan to escape, but security personnel materialized from the shadows. Julian Vance's team, efficient and implacable. Keller struggled briefly before being subdued. His expensive suit rumpled his face, contorted in impotent rage. Concurrent reports confirmed Dr. Alistair Finch had been apprehended by authorities in New York, implicated by the documents Keller possessed, and Isabel Moreau's subsequent testimony. Olivia received the confirmation message. Keller secured. Finch secured. Just as her own transport was speeding towards the Shanghai airport to rendezvous with her father's waiting jet. Relief washed over her, immense but fragile. They had done it. Keller was stopped. Her mother was safe, albeit perilously ill. She clutched the small data drive containing 2 decades of secrets. The immediate battle was won, but she knew the war for truth, for justice, for healing was only just beginning. The hours following Arthur Keller's arrest were a blur of secured communications, legal consultations, and anxious waiting outside the intensive care unit where Eleanor Sterling fought for her life. Julian Vance, reunited with his daughter after 20 years, found himself coordinating not a corporate takeover, but a complex web of medical updates and federal witness protection protocols. Ethan and Daniel Sterling worked tirelessly, compiling the final data Olivia had secured, preparing statements, and initiating contact with the authorities, ready to dismantle the corrupt legacy built by their own father and grandfather. Olivia, exhausted but resolute, divided her time between her mother's bedside, whispering reassurances, holding her frail hand, and collaborating with Ethan and Julian on the unavoidable storm they were about to unleash. The press conference, held 2 days later in the grand ballroom of a neutral hotel, was an international media event. Flashbulbs popped like frantic heartbeats as Ethan Sterling, flanked by Olivia Sterling, and the man introduced as Julian Vance, formerly presumed deceased, stepped up to the podium. Ethan, looking worn but determined, his arm subtly bandaged beneath his suit jacket, delivered a statement that sent shockwaves through the financial world. He didn't mince words. He acknowledged the decades of fraud initiated by Marcus Sterling, perpetuated and expanded by Arthur Keller, detailed the money laundering scheme, the framing of Eleanor Sterling, and the recent criminal actions, including the manipulation of her medical care. He announced his temporary resignation as CEO, his full cooperation with federal investigators, and the immediate establishment of the Eleanor Sterling Foundation, seeded with a substantial portion of his personal fortune, dedicated to victim restitution, ethical business advocacy, and medical research. Julian Vance spoke briefly, his voice thick with emotion, confirming his identity, corroborating the evidence, and expressing his profound gratitude for the chance to see his wife's name cleared. Olivia stood beside them, a silent testament to the human cost of the secrets and the quiet strength required to bring them into the light. The fallout was swift and brutal. Armed with irrefutable evidence and testimony, including carefully managed cooperation from Isabel Moreau, who traded information on her father's and Keller's network for significant legal leniency, though not escaping financial ruin, public disgrace, and strict probation, federal agents moved decisively. Arthur Keller and Dr. Alistair Finch faced a battery of charges, their careers and reputations obliterated. Investigations into Richard Moreau's dealings deepened, sending tremors through old money circles. Sterling Industries' stock plummeted initially, before stabilizing as interim leadership, guided by a newly empowered Daniel Sterling, and an independent oversight committee initiated radical transparency reforms. But amidst the legal battles and corporate restructuring, a quieter, more profound healing began. Eleanor Sterling, against considerable odds, pulled through. Her recovery was slow, arduous, marked by setbacks and small victories, but buoyed by the constant presence of her daughter, the tentative reconnection with the husband she thought she'd lost forever, and the unexpected gentle support of Ethan Sterling. He visited often not as a CEO, but simply as a man profoundly sorry for the pain his family's actions had caused, quietly ensuring Eleanor received the absolute best care, funded personally, long before the foundation was formally established. Olivia and Julian navigated the awkward, beautiful terrain of rebuilding a relationship fractured by 20 years of silence and sacrifice. There were tears, moments of anger, questions that had no easy answers, but underlying it all was a current of undeniable love and shared history. Olivia began to see the man behind the myth, not just the avenging strategist, but the father who had watched her grow up from afar, his heart aching across oceans. And through it all, Olivia and Ethan's connection deepened. Forged in the fire of crisis, their bond solidified into something built on mutual respect, shared vulnerability, and a trust earned under the most impossible circumstances. 1 year later, spring sunshine streamed through the large windows of a cheerful, light-filled rehabilitation center's private garden. Eleanor Sterling, her eyes bright, her movement still careful, but no longer frail, laughed as she watched Ethan attempt to demonstrate a new, physical therapy exercise, looking decidedly less coordinated than he did in a boardroom. "Ethan, dear," she chuckled, "I think perhaps you should stick to running the company. You move like you're negotiating a merger with that resistance band." Ethan grinned, abandoning the exercise. Noted Eleanor, "My talents clearly lie elsewhere." He sat beside her, taking her hand briefly. The Foundation's first scholarship recipients were announced today. 10 brilliant linguistics students just like Olivia. Olivia, radiant and noticeably pregnant, smiled from her seat nearby, leaning against Julian Vance, who looked utterly content. "Mum's already offered to mentor them," she said. "She's busier now than before. Keeps me young." Eleanor countered, her gaze softening as she looked at her daughter's rounded belly. Daniel Sterling arrived then, carrying a ridiculously large bouquet. "Sorry I'm late." The quarterly ethics compliance report took forever. Apparently, doing the right thing involves a surprising amount of paperwork. He winked at Ethan. "But Sterling Industries is officially boringly ethical now." "Congratulations, brother. It's the new legacy," Ethan said, quietly, his eyes meeting Olivia's. Sterling Industries, smaller perhaps, but more resilient and transparent than ever, was slowly regaining trust under Ethan's renewed leadership. The Eleanor Sterling Foundation was thriving. Arthur Keller and Dr. Finch were serving lengthy prison sentences. Isabel Moreau, stripped of her fortune and social standing, was reportedly fulfilling her community service requirement by organizing charity galas, a punishment Daniel once dryly observed of almost poetic irony, so Julian Vance said, turning to Olivia and Ethan, a playful glint in his eyes. "Have we landed on a name for this future CEO? Yet I've researched some excellent Mandarin immersion preschools in Manhattan, just in case." Olivia laughed. "Dad, we haven't even decided if it's a boy or a girl, and Ethan is lobbying hard for Marcus Jr. Can you believe it?" "Absolutely not," Ethan protested with mock seriousness, placing a hand protectively on Olivia's stomach. "Though watching you try to assemble the crib last week, Liv was more entertaining than any corporate negotiation." He leaned in, whispering something that made her blush, and swat his arm playfully. Eleanor watched them, her heart full. The scars of the past remained. They always would, but they no longer defined them. The truth, costly and painful as it was to unearth, had indeed found its way into the light. It had cleared names, dismantled empires built on lies, and allowed for something new, something better to grow in its place. Her daughter, once a waitress hiding her brilliance, now stood confidently beside the man who had seen past the uniform, the man who had chosen truth over legacy. Her husband, returned from the shadows, was finding peace not in revenge, but in family. As the afternoon sun warmed the garden, Eleanor Sterling looked at the faces of her loved ones, survivors, fighters, healers. Their lives, intertwined by fate and forged by adversity, had changed forever that day. Olivia answered a call in Chinese. But looking at them now, bathed in sunlight, anticipating the arrival of a new generation, free from the burdens they had carried, she knew with absolute certainty that the change had ultimately brought them home. And so Olivia and Ethan step into that future, bathed not just in the Manhattan sunlight, but in the hard-won light of truth. Their journey through decades of shadows, deception, and danger reminds us that legacies built on lies eventually crumble, but foundations rebuilt on courage and honesty can truly endure. It leaves you wondering, doesn't it? How long can buried secrets truly stay hidden, and what is the true cost of bringing them into the open? Perhaps their story touches something familiar within us, those moments where loyalty is tested, where speaking truth feels dangerous, or where the fight for what's right seems overwhelming. The strength found in Olivia's resolve, the difficult path of redemption, chosen by Ethan, the enduring love of a family torn apart and then stitched back together. These echoes resonate in the chambers of our own lives too, in ways both big and small. This journey through darkness and towards the dawn certainly left us with a lot to think about, and we imagine it might have for you too. We'd love to hear your reflections in the comments below. Here's something to consider. Do you believe true redemption, like Ethan Sterling's, is genuinely possible after such deep-seated family deception, and what does it take to truly earn it? We also truly value your feedback as we strive to bring you compelling narratives. If you have any thoughts on today's story, specific moments you loved, or ideas on how we can make our storytelling even better in the future, please don't hesitate to share them. Your insights are incredibly important and help us grow every single day. If this story about truth, ultimately finding its way into the light, touched you, we'd be so grateful if you'd hit the like button. And if you feel this journey of courage, love and redemption might resonate with someone, please consider sharing it with them. Of course, to ensure you don't miss out on future emotional journeys and explorations of the human spirit, please subscribe to the channel and ring that notification bell. Let's continue to discover meaningful stories together. Why not join our community of fellow story lovers too? Share your thoughts, connect with others, and be part of the conversation. You might also enjoy another story waiting for you right now on your screen. Thank you so much for spending your time with us today, for listening, and for reflecting. Until next time, take care and keep seeking the light in your own stories.